Hi everybody and welcome to week 12 on the Americas. Part 1 is on Mesoamerica through the classic Maya. In art history and archaeology the Americas are divided typically into North America, Mesoamerica, and South America. This nearly but not exactly corresponds to the geographical designations of North, Central, and South America. Mesoamerica is a culturally defined place, including portions of North America, specifically most of Mexico, whereas we wouldn't call Mexico most of Mexico part of Central America. So that's the difference between Central and Mesoamerica. The Americas were among the last places in the whole world to be populated. People who anthropologists call Paleo-Indians began to migrate from Asia to North America as early as 30,000 BCE. The narrow body of water that now separates Siberia in Asia and Alaska in North America, right there, which we call the Bering Strait, was relatively dry during portions of the last ice age. People were able to walk or canoe relatively easily across the dry land connection that we call the Bering Land Bridge or Beringia. So as the ice age waned and the waters returned, and that's how the Bering Strait formed. You can see an animation of the change in Beringia through a link in the lecture. Some scholars believe that during this initial period of migration, people followed an ice-free corridor that stretched southeast through Canada and into North America, right about here. Small bits of evidence of human habitation have been found all over North America that point to a series of migrations throughout the period from 30,000 BC to 12,000 BCE. People migrated into North, into Central, and then in South America during this era. A site at Monteverde, which is at the very tip of South America, dates to 14,500 BCE. The peoples and cultures of the Americas that predate significant and colonial contact with Europeans, we call those pre-Columbian. This term references Christopher Columbus's journey as the rough starting point for significant culture-affecting contact between indigenous Americans and Europeans. The terms Native Americans and Indigenous Americans are often used to refer to pre-Columbian peoples of the Americas as a whole. The term American Indians is usually also acceptable. The Americas present a variety of climates for its settlers. Native Americans could choose to migrate and live in places that ranged from arid or desert-like to temperate and seasonal climates to tropical or rainforest climates. Geographic features also offered a variety from plains regions to valleys to mountainous regions. These environmental factors combined with cultural factors to create diversity among the lifestyles of Indigenous Americans. Indigenous Americans from North to Meso to South America pursued a multitude of different lifestyles and economies. Some were clearly hunter-gatherer subsistence, while others lived off what they reaped from the sea. Some were more nomadic, while others were agricultural and agrarian. Others created city-states and even empires. Other cultural values varied among Indigenous Americans. For example, not all Native Americans developed the use of metal. Some mined and manipulated metal, but only for ceremonial purposes. Also, some Native Americans used masonry, cut stones or brick, for shelter and other structures, but others do not. Another example of the diversity of the Americas is in the use of written language. While some used oral language exclusively, others developed written languages, including hieroglyphic languages. Within this rich and fascinating diversity arise some themes that are common among the arts of indigenous peoples in the Americas. Most of these themes are not shared or practiced by all groups, but occur in significant numbers in at least two of the three regions, North, Meso, and South America. As we examine each of the three main regions, traits shared within those culture groups will be restated. One is the sacred mountain. Like other early cultures throughout the world, like the Japanese Kofun we most recently saw, Native Americans often created burial mounds, tombs, and temples in a pyramidal or mountain-like shape. As with other world cultures, Native Americans saw the mountain as a connection between the earth and the heavens. Large ceremonial centers are another common theme. Such a center is most often found in cultures that build city-states or empires. A ceremonial center consists of an open plaza surrounded by a combination of temples, platforms, and sometimes ball courts. You can actually see both the sacred mountain and the ceremonial center, though it is mostly overgrown here in our Olmec example. Animals and creatures are often common. Local animals feature very prominently in the art of the Americas. As in other cultures, animals or fantastic combinations of animals are representative of sacred concepts to indigenous Americans. Some animals you'll find often in indigenous American art include the alligator or caiman, the eagle or hawk, snakes, jaguars, or other wild cats. Certain materials and art forms or media tend to be important through the Americas as well. Stones like obsidian, jade, and turquoise are prized for their usefulness, beauty, and rarity. These materials are often used in art for enhancement and symbolic purposes. Turquoise, jade, and other green or blue stones were considered by indigenous Americans, as elsewhere, to be representative of water, foliage, and fertility in an abstract way. Feathers are also considered precious throughout the Americas and were used, like cacao beans and shells, as currency as well as in art. Fiber art forms like embroidery, hidework, and weaving were also important art forms in the Americas. Although the media associated with this form do not weather the centuries or millennia very well, there are some notable ancient examples that predate 1300 CE. And human sacrifice is another theme. Most prominent in Mesoamerica and South America, human sacrifice is another unifying theme of cultures of the Americas. While the histories of most cultures throughout the world tend to downplay or minimize human sacrifice, it was a common practice worldwide, with most evidence in the form of the bodies of victims appearing in tombs of the wealthy or in other kinds of mass graves. In Mesoamerica and South America, evidence of human sacrifice is present in artwork as well, as it was celebrated in the open as a form of nourishment of the gods. Furthermore, not all human sacrifice in the Americas was involuntary or fatal. Auto-sacrifice, self-sacrifice, or bloodletting, which is non-fatal and apparently voluntary, is more commonly depicted in art. In the time period covered by your book, from very ancient to 1300 CE, the Native American world looks different than it will after 1300. At this time in Mesoamerica, we have the formative and so-called classic cultures, including the Olmec, Teotihuacan, and Mayan cultures. In South America, the ancient coastal cultures of the Andes Mountains region include the Paracas and Nazca cultures and the Moche civilization. In North America, the mound builders cultures of the Midwest, the Mississippian cultures, and the ancient Pueblo cultures were the most prominent groups from whom we have artifacts and art. These are the cultures we'll explore in depth during this lecture. Mesoamerican cultures occur in diverse climatic regions that range from arid to tropical. Through trade, war, and other kinds of contact, the Mesoamerican groups came to share a large number of cultural characteristics. Mesoamerican cultures had knowledge of astronomy, that the movements in the heavens were regular, and that the world and universe followed a cycle. Like many other ancient cultures around the world, Mesoamerican cultures considered the objects in the sky, like stars and planets, to represent their deities. They understood that the seasons were cyclical, and that they had a working solar calendar of 365 days. This solar calendar they combined in their understanding of the passage of time with a ritual calendar unconnected to the natural cycles that was made up of 260 days. This elaborate accounting of time and movements of the heavens could be calculated far into the past and into the future, as made famous by our modern obsession with the year 2012. This attention to time and cycles was paired with a desire to record history. In both images and writing, Mesoamerican artists marked events such as the reigns and exploits of their leaders and other historical information. Mesoamerican cultures appear to have used writing all the way back to the ancient Zapotec civilization, and there is evidence that writing was used in a more rudimentary form during the Olmec period. Often artworks commemorating the historical achievements of Mesoamerican cultures were placed in a ceremonial center in the acropolis of the culture, with pyramidal structures forming temples and tombs. Also in these ceremonial centers, a ball court was used to play the ball game, which was one facet of a complex creation mythology that was shared at least in part by many Mesoamerican cultures. Part of this Mesoamerican belief system required the sacrifice of humans, sometimes in conjunction with the ball game. So let's talk about the Olmec culture, which flourished from about 1500 BCE to 400 BCE. Although people had been living in Mesoamerica for thousands of years previously, the first cohesive civilization for which there is evidence is the Olmec culture in the tropical southern region of Mexico, in Tabasco and Veracruz. So we're talking about this area in here. There's La Venta and there's San Lorenzo, two of our major Olmec cities that we're going to see. The Olmec civilization is regarded as the mother culture of Mesoamerica, as it establishes many elements of Mesoamerican culture that would last for millennia. The Olmec civilization was established around 2000 BC or earlier and faded at around 400 BCE. They appeared to use a hieroglyphic written language which emanated from a highly evolved iconographic system that we can't yet fully understand. They built pyramidal tombs and other structures, had a long count calendrical system, which establishes a date at the beginning of time and counts forward from there, in addition to the dual calendrical system of 365 solar days and 260 ritual days. The Olmec played a ritual ball game, a version of which would be played throughout the Americas, and they believed that a pair of hero twins defeated a pair of death gods in this game, which helped to perpetuate humanity. Bloodletting is evident in depictions by Olmec artists. The Olmec also started the tradition of trading in stones and shells over long distances, a practice that would continue throughout Mesoamerican history. Like later Mesoamerican cultures, Olmec sites feature ceremonial centers aligned on a north-south axis. Sites at San Lorenzo and La Venta in Mexico were at different times the capitals of Olmec culture and exhibit this tendency to align the city along the cardinal points. The Great Pyramid and ball court at La Venta on the screen was once believed by archaeologists to have deliberately resembled a soft-sided, cone-like volcano. It turns out, though, after it had been excavated, that the original form of the structure was quite solidly pyramidal with sharp angles. In front of the pyramid, you might be able to see a sort of light shadow in the form of a T or an I. This is believed to be the foundation of a ball court. The ball courts of the Olmec were similar to the ball courts in later Mesoamerica. They are shaped like a serif capital I, with a long center lane and two rectangular courts at each end. At the sites of San Lorenzo and La Venta, sculpture is even more fascinating. A number of large boulder-like stones, let's see if I can find one there for you, were carved in the shapes of heads that have been found buried, ritually it seems. Some of the sculptures appear to have deliberate pockmarks or drill holes, and you can see some of those here, very round, very deliberately made drill holes. At first, scholars wondered if the attempted destruction and burial of these didn't have something to do with an invasion from another culture which took over the Olmec. After all, it seems that the Olmec picked up and left San Lorenzo rather suddenly and moved to La Venta. At least that's what the archaeological evidence seems to state. But today, most scholars recognize the importance of neutralization of artwork to many ancient and even current cultures. Sometimes, as with the Japanese dogu of the last lecture, for example, artworks considered to be spiritually powerful must be neutralized through destruction, burial, or both when they're no longer needed. These heads may represent past rulers, as they all wear a similar helmet and have similarly fearsome expressions. Perhaps the sculptures were intended, for example, to help escort the deceased ruler into the afterlife. Other sculptures include masks of semi-precious stones such as jades and jadeite. These masks, along with the colossal heads, reveal a typical Olmec style of depicting the human. The faces are rather fleshy, with downturned mouths and sometimes rather what we would call pouty lips. This expression may be meant to emulate the mouth of a jaguar or wildcat. Other humanoid images, like this one, the so-called Kunzaks, combine the typical Olmec downturned mouth with fangs and make this association between humans and cats even clearer. Images like the Kunzaks are frequently called jaguar babies by scholars, as they resemble small people, perhaps children, with cat-like lips and fangs. Here's a few more examples of so-called jaguar babies. They're kind of cute. Another really interesting jaguar baby, the most famous of them, is this one, the Las Limas figure. This sculpture depicts an adult, for sure, with hieroglyphic and symbolic carvings on his body. He's carrying a small figure, similar to the Kunzaks in its facial expression. The Las Limas jaguar baby also has a helmet that actually resembles those worn by the colossal heads, as well as images of the hero twins. Is the Las Limas figure holding a jaguar baby? Does it depict a myth or a spiritual activity, perhaps performed by a shaman using an artwork similar to the Kunzaks? It's really hard to say. Other sculptures depict full-body figures who seem to be human rather than part jaguar. There are lots of very small ones with the same downturned Olmec mouth that we find in people's collections and from sites. This group that you're seeing on the screen, called Votive Offering Number 4, was found buried as a cache near a temple. Perhaps this cache was meant to help consecrate the temple. It includes several axes, or celts as they are also known, along with many semi-precious stone figures with open mouths and elongated craniums. It appears when found that the figures were all listening to one central figure speak, and in fact how they're shown on the screen is the orientation in which they were found. It seems from the art of later Mesoamericans, like the Maya, that an elongated skull was considered beautiful and encouraged along through wrapping the head of a baby while the skull grew. The last artwork is just one of many that demonstrate the importance of caves and underworld imagery to Mesoamericans. On this altar, which was once a throne, as most such altars were, we see a figure emerging from a cave-like opening surrounded by two stylized fangs or jawbones that are meant to represent the mouth of the underworld. The figure, like the Las Limas sculpture, holds a baby figure. Oh, there he is. And there are the stylized fangs or jawbones. Is the baby emerging from a primordial cave through which one could access the underworld? This is very possible, as underworld imagery in Mesoamerica frequently depicts the land of the dead as underground and represented by a great mouth. If so, artworks like this one may be the key to an understanding of the unique qualities of the origin mythology of the Olmecs. Located about 50 miles north of Mexico City, Teotihuacan was a ruin when it was regarded by the much later Aztecs after 1300 CE as the place of the birth of their gods. The site of the Teotihuacan civilization was heavily populated and flourished from about 200 BCE, but the city was abandoned by 700 CE, just 900 years later. To this day, it remains unclear why the Teotihuacanos chose to leave their large, well-populated, and well-visited city behind. Once it was speculated that some traumatic disaster must have befallen the city, like a war, evidenced by some indications of fire. But as in other mysterious cultures, it seems that when you strip away the drama, the reasons for the Teotihuacanos to leave may have been pretty mundane. They may have had a couple of bad years harvesting an important crop, for example. But in any case, now it's clear that the site was not abandoned all at once, but instead fell into decline over time, which is much less in line with the idea that some huge disaster, immediate disaster, befell them. Teotihuacan's history is something of a mystery. Teotihuacan may well have been a holy pilgrimage site for other Mesoamerican cultures in the region. This theory is supported by the enormity of its ceremonial center, which you can see on the screen. The ceremonial center of Teotihuacan is populated by large and small pyramidal temples, which are not entered, but instead ascended by stairs, which you can see are very prominent. These pyramids each had a small temple, perhaps made of wood, on top, which could be entered. This format, we'll see, becomes the standard for other Mesoamerican pyramid buildings. The smaller temples along the so-called Avenue of the Dead, the name given to it by the later Aztecs, have a peculiar pattern that is called talud tablero, a phrase that means slope and panel. It refers to the sloping shape of the vertical panels of the steps on the pyramids, which batter or bend in before standing straight up on each step. You can see it very easily here in this photo. Little slope and panel, and another little angle or slope and panel, and so on. That is talud tablero. The larger temples, like the pyramids of the sun and moon, were built over caves within which sacred artworks were stored, such as the sculptures and frescoes that we're going to be seeing shortly. Let's see if I can find some of those. There's one sculpture, the water goddess sculpture, which we'll probably see again later, and some frescoes as well. So these were found in caves underneath those temples. Some of them are found in apartment complexes nearby, though. Another building of significance at Teotihuacan's ceremonial center is the Temple of the Feathered Serpent. Let's take a look at this map, and you can see that this is where we were standing in this photo. We're standing at the top of the Pyramid of the Moon, and we're looking down the avenue. Oops, I passed it again. We're looking down the avenue, small pyramids, and then there is the Temple of the Feathered Serpent inside of the Ciudadela, which means citadel. So there it is. The citadel, or Ciudadela, and the Temple of the Feathered Serpent are in the illustration here. I think I already mentioned that. The Temple of the Feathered Serpent is a pretty standard Teotihuacano temple, save for the elaborate relief sculpture on the steps of the pyramid. The temple displays the Teotihuacano vision of an important Mesoamerican figure, the mythical feathered serpent. The feathered serpent is represented by a human with bird and serpent features. This mythical creature will take on many forms. Here, the feathered serpent is a skeletal serpent head with a collar of feathers around its neck. You can see it repeated on every step. However, the feathered serpent is not adorned with the feathers of just any bird. Although you can no longer see the bright paint that would have covered the temple, the feathers are intended to represent the long green tail feathers of the quetzal bird, whose plumage was traded among Mesoamerican peoples like currency. A figure that appears to be impersonating the feathered serpent, perhaps a shaman. Let's see if we can find that one there. There we go. Seems to be impersonating the feathered serpent here, is shown in this fresco from under one of the great pyramids of Teotihuacan. The serpent or lizard-like head worn in the headdress of the shaman is adorned with long feathers representing the quetzal bird and its power. Frescoes like this one were painted on the cave's walls, but such paintings could also be found on the walls of apartments surrounding the main ceremonial center. The shaman seems to be carrying something that may be an incense burner here. From his other hand pours a water-like fluid representing fertility. From his mouth issues another issuance, which may be speech scroll filled with images representing words. Before him are 4 wedge-shaped objects, and there are also several behind him as well. These are spines of the maguey cactus, which were used throughout traditional Mesoamerica for ritual self-sacrifice or auto-sacrifice. The shaman may be preparing to preside over a ritual where the spines will be used to pierce the skin of willing participants so that the blood that flows from the small wounds can be offered to the gods. Many such frescoes here's another feathered serpent. Don't want to pass that by. Many such frescoes often also depict a deity called a great goddess. One fresco here shows it with claws, with eyes and a mouth, but with a very kind of inhuman shape. And here she seems maybe a little bit more human. Her enormous headdress is filled with quetzal feathers and is even mounted with the head of a quetzal bird. From her hands emerge water-like streams with images probably representing the fertility that water brings. We also see her in a squat cubicle statue there on the screen. The great goddess's hands are open, as is her mouth, and her appearance is generally also abstract. Next, let's look at the Maya. The Mayan civilization is unique in that it is arguably the most complex, advanced, and widespread of these early Mesoamerican civilizations. Though the Maya had lived in the heartland for some time, Mayan civilization flourished, meaning it expanded and was able to support a large number of people between 300 and 900 CE. So this period of 600 years is called the Classic Maya Age. During the classic Mayan civilization, Mayan culture reached the Valley of Mexico, which we would say is here, kind of around Mexico City, the Yucatan Peninsula, which is up here, Honduras, Guatemala, and Belize. The period is also marked by the formation of many city-states or kingdoms, at which there were built large ceremonial centers, superseding even the grandeur of Teotihuacan. At Tikal in Guatemala, which you can see here, for example, masonry structures, especially stepped pyramids, topped by small shelters, would have lit up the sun with their whitewashed sides and facades. The Acropolis at Tikal houses the tombs of rulers, including Hassa Khankawil, who is also portrayed in Stela 16, which you can see here. Here's a photograph of the stela, and there's an illustration with an explanation of what we're seeing. The stela, you will recall, often commemorates an event or an individual. Stela 16 easily displays the complexity of Maya symbolism, which led the way to their complex form of language. The Maya formatted the hieroglyphic writing system into a full-fledged written language with syntax and grammar. The Maya also codified the dual calendar and long count system, the one that counts days forward from the beginning of time. The Maya used the calendars to such a consistent and accurate degree that artworks like this can be dated by their hieroglyphics precisely to the year, like 711 CE. The calendar enhanced their and our understanding of their history, and kept alive the legends of heroes like 18 Rabbit, a Copan king depicted in Stela H, which we're going to see shortly. Where is he? We're looking at Copan now. There's Stela H. This Stela H, which depicts Copan's 18 Rabbit, depicts him as both young and old. Young on one side, this side, and old on the other side, where he wears a beard. The codex-style book appears to have been a really popular art form during the classic Maya era, but unfortunately, most of those classic Maya examples that survived the decline of Maya culture were destroyed by Catholic missionaries coming to America later in the 1500s. A Mayan codex, like the Dresden Codex, is made of accordion pages. The books are often almanacs of information both earthly and spiritual. With the Mayan love of history, it's no wonder that the creation of books was such a popular pursuit. Along with the stepped pyramid temples, other features of the typical Mayan acropolis include a ball court, and for that we are going to go back briefly to Copan. Not only ball courts, but also palaces and administrative centers too. But there's really no Mayan site in Mesoamerica of any size that does not have a ball court. you just find in every single ceremonial center. Here you can see one at the site of Calakmul, and you can also see how the forest retakes these Mayan sites. I mean, really the ones that are built in the rainforest just get immediately overgrown once people leave. And here is one at Copan that's much better preserved simply because there's been a dedicated group of archaeologists and anthropologists working there for a long time. Copan is in Honduras, and it was a major city center, not as big as Tikal, but certainly very important and considered a very scholarly center, an artistic center. You can also see some other images from the ball court. Let me see if I can find ones. Go. Here's some ball court markers. A macaw head from the ball court at Copan would have once been brightly painted, depicts a macaw, those really brightly painted parrot-like birds. And this would have been on the wall of the ball court along here. And then there are also ball court markers that would have been at one time in the floor, the ground of the alley down here. But actually these markers, the macaw heads and the discs, are used at different times, different eras, not at the same time. The typical eye-shaped court, which you can see pretty well here, was used not just for sport, but in order to reenact the story of the hero twins, who defeated the death gods in the ball game on the gods' home court in the underworld. Lots of imagery in art surrounds the ball game and invokes the idea of holiness and power, as well as elements associated with evil or the underworld. See if I can find some more depictions. Here we see some drawings of relief sculptures from Yaxchilan that show the ball as well as ball players in ball playing positions, kneeling on one knee, getting ready to hit the ball with a hip or a shoulder, and with their elaborate costumery and armor. They did seem to wear armor. And you can see they have sort of angled or stepped playing ground to use here. You can also see in this vessel the quite elaborate and heavy armor and headdress that a ball player is going to be wearing. So the macaw heads, along with the quetzal, the macaw is a very important bird. That is why it would have been included here. It's often associated with gods and goddesses. But also this ball court marker specifically depicts a story from the hero twins' adventures in the underworld. So we see a death god who's indicated by, it's hard to see in this illustration, but he has a hand covering his mouth, as well as the leopard printed kilt, which is associated with the death god. And here we have a hero twin in his heavy armor and the ball in between them as they play. And then we see these stylized jawbones or fangs, which are meant to indicate that we're actually in the underworld. Now this ball was a rubber ball. It was made from, natural rubber from the rubber tree, and it was very heavy, and thus the armor that our players use. Eventually in the story, the hero twins are victorious, and they manage to save their two fathers. Yes, they had two fathers and no mother, and one of those fathers whose head had been used as the ball in the game. But the hero twins' victory is not just there to remind us of athletic ability. In the tale, by defeating the death gods, the twins, in essence, save the world from doom. They ensure the world will continue to turn and that the seasons and the calendar will continue on. This in turn ensures the continuation of the human race and the Maya specifically, who live and eat according to the beneficence of the gods as well as the ruler. So the ball game actually ensures the cycles of the universe and life, and that they continue. Pakal, whose tomb and tomb goods at Palenque are some of the best preserved and most beautiful classic Mayan artworks, depicts himself as a maize god. Let's see if I can find that image real quick. So here we have the tomb of Pakal. Here's the sarcophagus and the lid underneath his great pyramid temple of the inscriptions, which is also the tomb of Pakal. And there you can see another view of the sarcophagus. And here he is shown, see if I can find this image, as a maize god. So his headdress and hair seem to be morphed into one and seem to look like the sort of skin on and tassels on corn. His hair reminds us of the husks and tassels, and that forges the connection between the king and food and sustenance and a good life. So the tomb of Pakal yielded many lintels that reinforce our understanding of the Mayans as a historical group of people. The lintel on the screen, which, by the way, a lintel is a large panel of relief carving that probably was affixed to a wall. This lintel shows Lady Shok, Pakal's mother, lighting, let's see where we are, lighting bark paper, probably after performing an auto-sacrifice in order to drip blood on the paper. Royal blood was considered especially valuable to the gods. This image is also historical, as it is the moment of her ascension to the throne of Tikal. Also on the sarcophagus, which you can see here in a photo and here in an illustration, the lid depicts the death of Pakal in front of the Mayan world tree as an incredible low relief piece of carving. The idea of associating life and prosperity with gods, with the heavens and the ruler, is not new to us, but the attachment of the concept of human sacrifice to it is new and interesting. In the Mayan ball games, the winner or loser, depending on the rules practiced by the kingdom, would be sacrificed, their blood and body offered to the gods. This was considered to be a highly honorable way to die, and high-level enemies captured in war might be able to take this prestigious way out. The Maya practiced bloodletting and human sacrifice of slaves captured through war on what we might call a relatively conservative basis for many years. But in the waning years, these practices seem to have accelerated as warfare changed. It appears that the Mayan cities became more desperate as their residents cut down the very forest that fed them in order to build bigger cities. The decline of the classic Mayan florescence appears to have been due to an escalation of power grab warfare among the more powerful city-states.